This podcast is brought to you by The Secret Meditation. Learn to get in touch with the magical frequency, the frequency that will change your life now. Find The Secret Meditation at www.thesecretmeditation.com. Hey everybody, this is Mark J. Ryan, and welcome to Hypnosis and NLP. The map is not the territory. The menu is not the meal. Hey everybody, this is Mark J. Ryan, and welcome to Hypnosis and NLP. And today I had a certain podcast planned about the map is not the territory, part of the initial introductory courses to NLP and hypnosis that I'm doing for free here on my podcast and for my listeners and email and Facebook people that are still listening. When I went back to the podcast, I realized I still had 2,000 subscribers after like 8 years of being offline. So I was excited about that. Got a lot of great feedback after the first podcast about the basics of NLP and my history with it, and the history as best I know. And then it was deciding what was I going to put next, and it was going to be between stimulus response, anchoring, as we call it in NLP, or the map is not the territory. And I felt more comfortable with the map is not the territory, so that's what I did with this podcast. Went up to the mountain today, Mount Shasta, for all those of you not familiar. And I go up on the mountain and find a nice dirt road to go off on where it's fairly quiet. And how I get inspired, and I start talking and let it roll. Well, sometimes I have a format that I plan on doing, which I thought was going to happen today, and then it went off track, and I just kind of got inspired and let it flow for about an hour and 20 minutes. So what I recommend is if you want to take notes, take notes. This does not require a lot of listening attention. So if you want to listen to it in the background while you're driving, just be a little careful with it. It can be a little hypnotic, but I am all over the place. I'm doing all kinds of loops, open loops, and then closing them, and explanations, telling all kinds of stories and metaphors. And I feel real good about the amount of information that you'll be confident that you know the difference between the menu and the territory and the map and the meal, which I kind of shifted around on you. The map is not the territory, and the menu is not the meal. So sit back, listen, and here's a recommendation. One of the reasons I wanted to put this on the front is I want you to consider something in your life while you're listening to this, and bring it to your attention every so often. But before you go to listening to this, what I'd like you to do is to think of a problem in your life. And that's any problem. Could be with anybody. You don't have to go too deep into it. Just think about it. Think about how it makes you feel. Notice where it makes you feel, what thoughts come in, and then begin to listen to the podcast. Every so often, bring up the thought about what that is. And then at the end of the podcast, now this is breaking into two parts. The first part, which is the one I did today, which is about an hour and 20 minutes. And then there's a second part that I did several years ago that I haven't edited yet, which I'll edit. I'll make that into a part 2 of my viewpoint of the menu is not the meal and the map is not the territory from back then. What I recommend, at least with the first part, is, again, bring something up to your attention and then relax it. Let it go. Listen to the podcast every so often. Kind of remember where you're at with the issue. And then at the end of the podcast, the first part, think back about the problem state, the issue, whatever it was that you had, and notice what's different about it after you've listened to it for just an hour and 20 minutes, and see what happens. You can do that multiple times if you want to go back through it. But notice that if you'll pay attention to the way it is when you start and the way it is when it ends, I think you will notice a difference. I'm priming you a little bit here. If you don't, that's fine. But I think most of you will notice some kind of difference in there, and that shows you the power of just explaining, just understanding, getting your unconscious to understand this process, this wonderful thing called NLP and hypnosis, not the old-fashioned type of hypnosis, but the modern-day hypnosis, that you will find a difference just from listening to that. And then think about where they can go from there, how many other options you might have with this if you're even more specific and focused in on an issue, what can be done with that. So enjoy the podcast. Give me some feedback. Let me know how you think or what you think about the podcast and how the results of listening to it might make a difference in your life. And then I'll put part 2, which actually comes from several years ago, where I was several years ago with this subject matter, out shortly. I was going to combine the two together, but because the first one's so long, I wanted to give you a little break in between, and you can go listen to that one. So enjoy. This is Mark J. Ryan. Here it is, me up on the mountain, talking about the map is not the territory, the menu is not the meal. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. This is Mark J. Ryan. Welcome back to the show. And today I am once again up on Mount Shasta a little bit. It's slightly overcast, kind of a thin film in the sky, and a little chilly. So I'm inside my car. There's one window open. Got some good wind blowing today. So if you hear little noises in the background, it's the wind. I'm a little bit off the highway, so if you hear some cars going back and forth, you might just like that. I don't know if you heard that one or not. Might think about sitting up here with me. A nice, beautiful area as we talk about today's show. Today we're going to talk a little bit about last week. Let's review a little bit of last week. Told you a little bit about NLP and how I got into it and who some of the founders are, and just gave you a little bit of a background. I'm sure we'll come back and cover some more points, and as I go along, more history will pop out. I'm looking at this as not so technical. I want it to be easy to understand, layman's terms, without too much reference, without too much getting into the science. The reason I don't want to get into the science is because, to me, you can know this stuff, but if you don't experience it, it doesn't make that much of a difference. If you know it and you're taking a test, it's good to know what the specifics are and everything, but beyond that, now it's the implementation of that. So, as we covered that last week, the next logical step would probably be start at the foundation, and the foundations really of what NLP is, and that's basically what this introductory course is going to be. And I was going back and forth. Should I do one about what we call the map is not the territory, the menu is not the meal, or stimulus, response, and anchoring? To me, those are kind of the basic foundations, and then I kept getting more information, and as I was reading different things, I said, I think the map is not the territory, but if some of the stimulus response and anchoring comes out as well, it's hard to pull it all apart so you can separate it, that one doesn't cross over to the other. So sometimes I have to take them apart as far as I can where I think they're going to be useful to you to understand it, but also to understand there's a lot of other pieces that go together of it. So what we'll do is we'll take it apart, bring it into its pieces, and then put it back together. Once you have the pieces, they start to interact together like machinery. If we had an engine, we take an engine apart. There's a lot of different parts to the engine. And then look at each part individually, find out what its purpose is, and then begin to put it back together. And there's different types of engines. What kind of engine are you going to put together? Well, so the first thing we talk about is the map is not the territory. When I say an engine is a map. There's all kinds of engines. There's gas engines, there's diesel engines, there's electrical engines, so to speak. But mainly motors are more electrical, engines are more by combustion, steam, gasoline, diesel, things like that. But what kind of engine am I talking about? Am I talking about the engine in the front of a locomotive? We've got the main train line that runs through Mount Shasta going from San Diego to Seattle, coming through Mount Shasta. So during the day and at night, and sometimes up on the mountain you can hear it faint because get up higher, you can still hear it a little bit. But our house at nighttime, it's really nice, especially in the wintertime. You can just hear this faint whistle blowing as it goes through town. Or am I talking about a car engine? And how many different train engines are there? How many different car engines are there? How many different jet engines are there? So there's an infinite amount of engines. So when I say engine, we put it back into, and then what kind of engine are you putting together? And that's the map that you have. And what we do is, once you have a certain map, if we say engine, and you, every time it's a lawnmower engine, it's a 3.5, I think they were called Tacoma. I might be off on it a little, but Briggs and Stratton engine that they put on a lot of lawnmowers to mow lawns with. It's a different type of engine than a car engine, a bigger version of a gasoline engine. And then there's diesel engines, there's mixed oil and gas engines. So whatever you had in your mind when I said engine is most likely going to be different than just about everybody else. And if it's not going to be different, it's going to be a different angle or a different viewpoint, or it's going to be closer in your imagination. So there's a lot of variables to what this is. But when we say the map is not the territory, the meal is not the menu, what we're saying is that the picture that you have in your mind of the engine isn't the actual engine itself. Now, it's obvious when I say that, and it comes out as obvious. But if you take a deeper look and you take a longer look at it and just stay with it for a little bit, there's the initial reaction of, yeah, well, that's pretty simple. I know that when I look at the menu, I'm not going to eat the menu. If I want a burger and fries, or I want a vegan meal, whichever end of the spectrum that you're at, a meal is a menu. When I say, let's have a meal. So in your mind, what's your idea of a meal? And up here in Mount Shasta, as we're anywhere else, but more so here in Mount Shasta than there was back in upstate New York when I was living there, you've got a lot of variations, not just of what a meal consists of, but I have a lady that every so often I ask her, she's a Japanese lady, cooks just amazing different food, and she hasn't been feeling real well for the last year or so. She's been going through some things, but when we'd had get-togethers and gatherings, she'd always bring these wonderful dishes that I just had never tasted before. And because her son is so allergic to so many different things, allergy actually has, different reactions, that she has to be very particular about what she cooks and how she cooks it. And so if I know that I'm eating anything that she's cooking, I know it's healthy. I know it's going to be about as healthy. And healthy is another map. There's another map. What does healthy mean to you? What does healthy mean to me? There's many different things. There's many different maps. Everything we talk about, when I talk about maps, what kind of map are you thinking about? You thinking a GPS map? Are you thinking a Google map? Are you thinking a Rand McNally paper map? So we're living in this world of maps that we create in our mind. There is a reality that's out there. And there's a certain amount of information that comes in through our five senses that from the time we were children and trained by our parents and teachers and neighbors and priests and rabbis and whoever else, nuns taught us different things, we started creating maps based on their information, or putting the sensory information that we have, the basic sensory information that we have. We're going to go back to sensory information. That's going to be a specific podcast, how we take information in and things like that. But we take these information pieces in from all the different senses, and we build maps. And a lot of times our map making isn't very good, and it's not fully complete, especially when we were children, when we didn't have a lot of information or data. We would build certain types of maps that a lot of times, at this point, we don't remember. So when I'm doing coaching with somebody and I'm listening to them, they'll have an understanding consciously that they've kind of put together a map of what they think is wrong. But within that map of how they build the conscious map, I can hear missing bits of information that they may not be aware of. I don't know what that information is, but I know there's a gap there. And the reason this is important, and the why for you, is because as you explore the maps, as you explore the difference between the maps and the territory, you learn and discover about yourself. But first, we have to get your attention and your awareness onto your personal maps versus the actual sensory data that's coming in through your eyes, through your ears, through your fingers, through your nose, through your taste buds, your feelings in your body, both internal, what we call emotions, which is a combination of different sensory things. And we build maps on that, and we have meanings to these maps. And we just live most of it is automatically from these maps in this territory. And if you're doing well and you're having a great time, that's wonderful. The thing about maps is you can make them more refined and even make them more wonderful for you. But a lot of times they're just not working. And people need updating of their maps, but they don't know where the updating needs to be done or handled. And my job is to go and to find out. And if you get into NLP and hypnosis, what you'll do is begin to start seeing, and this is a lifelong journey. I've been doing this for over 30 years now. Well, 29 years, because it was 86 when I first picked up Tony Robbins' book, Unlimited Power, and got interested in NLP. But hypnosis, I've been studying hypnosis since I've been a kid. Used to love it. And my dad, again, was one of the first things that I would be allowed, if there was a hypnotist on, or Kreskin was on, Johnny Carson, years ago. I got to stay up late, even though it was a school night, because he liked it too. And so figuring out how the mind works, the maps of the mind, and how they're all put together. The time that I've been studying, I'm realizing after 30 years, almost 29 years of studying this stuff, and then the amount of years, the hypnosis books that I read from when I was a kid up until I found out about NLP, is tremendous. But here I am, let's say 30 years into it, and then total time with the hypnosis, 50 years, not quite 50 years, probably 45 years into it. I am at the point now where I'm having these wake-ups of different maps, different levels of maps, and how much I don't know. Because we seem to be on this journey as we're growing up to get to the knowledge of knowing. My son is 14 right now. He's my stepson, actually. And but I'm looking at him and I'm remembering. And a lot of times I'll walk him through things that I remember as a kid and say, hey, look, this is where I was and this is what I went through. And, a lot of times kids don't want to hear it at that age because they think they know. By the time you're 19 or 20, you do know everything in the world. And then it starts falling apart again. And then by the time you're 40 or 50, a lot of people have midlife crises and go, I don't know everything. I don't know anything. I'm stuck. I need to revamp that and to look at my life and reevaluate, okay, what am I going to do here? So time has a funny way. Time itself is a map, another map. Time has a funny way of shifting and changing maps. Location, where you are, has a way of shifting and changing maps. Your environment is approximately 51% of what you're going to do. So your environment, and then the map, the meaning you put on that environment, people, places, things, emotions, thoughts, feelings, all those things together determine pretty well what your behavior and what your action is going to do. So there's so many things influencing you from so many different areas that the more I find out about this, the more I realize I don't know. And in one sense, if I'm 14 or 19, that scares the crap out of me if I had this realization back then. I want to know what I know, and I'm cocky about it, and I know this stuff. And I get this age, and I'm realizing how much more I don't know, how much more there is to learn, which means to me that I'm going to have more fun the rest of my life figuring and learning about this stuff and getting new information and making meanings, taking meanings apart, trying on other meanings. And so the map is not the territory. The menu is not the meal. And if we keep on this path of playing with this, it keeps you in action. It keeps you moving because things really are in movement all the time. What we try to do is map a territory and say, this is what the territory is. And I'm a fan of paper maps. I still like paper maps. I will do a Google map online, but usually I'll print it out on paper and follow it from paper. It's because I was brought up on it. Now, people that are brought up on online maps and GPSs, probably don't want to have anything to do with paper map, but I'm going to refer to paper because it's one of my preferences in maps and where I've learned a lot. And since I've been a kid, again, maps have been fascinating to me, because what I would do is I would look at a map and then I would read into what the map was, the highway, how to get there, or let's say the mountains or the Finger Lakes of New York where I grew up. And I would look at the map and say, oh, there's a side road and it goes up to an elevation of 1,200 feet. And as you know, I'd go look at these roads and saying, they're only open in the certain times of the year. And here's a state park, a national park that I never even knew existed. And I would go exploring. As soon as I had a driver's license, I was off exploring. I wanted to see, because in my mind I had a sense and an idea of what this meant. But when I actually got there, it was something different. So I'm playing off of two different maps, because actually when I was there looking at things, that's only still a representation. If somebody else went to the exact same space, they're probably going to be filtering out information that gives them a different experience of it, where I might be looking at, like right now, I'm looking at these pine trees and the wind blowing, and I see the needles, and the sun's hitting them in a certain way, and they glisten, and it's really beautiful. I can hear the noise. I can hear the wind blowing. Looking down, I'm on a dirt road. It's not a paved road. And to me, that all brings together the way the sun's hitting, looking at the mountain, and then I'm actually looking across at Mount Eddy, which is, because since I'm on Shasta, I'm looking over at another 10,000-foot mountain with some snow on top of it. The combination of what I'm recognizing brings a peace to me. I like to come up here and sit because it brings a calmness and a peace to me. Somebody else might come, and they might see this, and I remember my parents. I remember my mother. She came down when I was done with basic training in New Jersey. My map was get back to my hometown, see my friends, because I had a little bit of time before my next advanced training. But once I was done with basic training, I wanted to go home. Well, her map was, no, we want to go down to Williamsburg and I was done with my advanced training. It was more than basic training was in Fort Dix, and then I went to Belvoir, Virginia for my advanced training, and she picked me up there. So from the advanced training, it was to get home. To her map was they wanted to go down to Colonial Williamsburg. If they're driving all that way down there, 6-7 hours, and so I was not happy. So we went down to Williamsburg, and I was grumpy and not happy because I only had a certain amount of time before I had to fly out to Germany. So I went down there. They experienced it one way, and I experienced it another way. And I'm sure me not liking it, they were aware of that, and that I wanted to go home, and that I didn't want to spend a lot of time there. So I missed an opportunity to really get a different level at that point in time. Doesn't mean I can't go back there and do that. So the key about the maps and spending more time with this than you normally might, just the realization of it is to be able to transfer maps in your mind's eye, and to navigate inner territory of your maps and the real parentheses territory that you're at and how you're experiencing it, and being able to change the map in your mind. But first you have to take them apart. First you have to realize that they're there, and then realize if you're not feeling good and you're not enjoying it, what is the focus? The other thing is there's hidden maps. There's secret maps. We hear about secret maps. There's maps that are way down, what we call them implicit maps. There's explicit and implicit maps. Explicit maps you can pretty well explain and describe as best as possible so another person can understand. Implicit map is like, I'm here, I'm in this great place, but all of a sudden I am not feeling well. I'm not feeling good. I'm not liking where I'm at. I want to get out of here. Or the other person is just going, this is great. What do you want to go anywhere? Well, in my mind's eye, I watched a television program last night about the bears of Northern California, and the mountain lions that are here, and some of the other animals that can be aggressive every once in a while, especially if there's not a lot of food, because it's been a drought for so many years. and we're in a bad situation. And so my mind now is on that map of that TV program that's fresh in my mind that I'm watching, where the other person is up here and just totally enjoying it. Or the difference between me sitting in my car or laying out on the ground somewhere in the bushes. So if you have the ability to keep changing your maps or finding out what is stopping you, and the danger might be real. I mean, the difference between the map of what we call fear, if we really start to break that map down of fear, we could break it down into two different things: fear and danger. Fear is something we make up in our mind, but there may not be a present danger, or to use a movie term, clear and present danger. If you're in danger, that's a whole different map on the territory. You need to do something. You need to pay attention to that for the sake of danger. Your fear, your paranoia, if you're in danger, probably is fairly accurate, and you should do something about it. But if it's just fear, if it's the thought of there's not a bear for 5 miles, 10 miles, or anywhere out during the daytime, I don't have anything to worry about. But again, the different maps. So we've got thousands and thousands of these maps, and we've also got implicit maps. The implicit maps are the maps that are below the surface. They're kind of incomplete maps. So when I do some hypnosis with somebody, I think I brought this metaphor out before, but I think it'll be useful here. And I hypnotize them, and in a trance, I have them take their shoes and socks off. And then I bring them out of the trance without having them put their shoes and socks back on. And I'll be talking to them for a while and then say, okay, we're done here, and you can get off stage, or you can get out of the chair, you can go home, whatever. And they get up to start to move, and there's a realization at that point that their shoes and socks are off. And the mind has a thing it begins to do. It starts to make up reasons why. Maybe based on social, you don't want to be embarrassed. It may be fear that, like, holy mackerel, how did this happen? I don't remember that. So what the mind does, it kind of covers these blind spots up. And so I'll say, what's the matter? And I said, well, my shoes are off, and I said, well, oh yeah, your shoes and socks are. Why did you take them off? And people's minds will start to go, well, my foot started itching, or they got really hot, and they come up with all these reasonings. And they're fast. They're really, really quick. It's kind of like I go out and I watch who does it? Jimmy Kimmel, I think. He'll send people out on the street and say, what'd you think about the president's speech last night? Well, the president's speech is going to be tonight, but he'll go out and ask him about what did you think about President Obama's speech? Did you like it? Did you agree with what he had to say? Oh, it was great. It was fantastic. I couldn't. So you did watch it? Oh, yeah, I watched it, and it was, what did you think about his point? And they make up these points that he talked about, and these people go on, and it's not just one person. The comedy of it is that we're in on it before they know it, but yet their mind works, boom, just like that, coming up with reasons and excuses because they're on the spot and they don't want to look stupid, or whatever their reasoning is, but the mind does that. So the same thing with hypnosis. It'll start coming up with reasons of why. If you begin to look at your maps and be able to take them apart and know more information that, let's say, again, parentheses, real, compared to what's in your mind and what you're making up, or how you make up your own maps. Very important. How do you make up your own maps? This is going to be very, very important going down the road. How we filter the basic information that then creates how we make up these maps. So, if we go back to looking at the Jimmy Kimmel show, and we go back to looking at what's going on with the hypnosis, what happens with us is that when we have these implicit memories from our childhood, they're still active in the lower parts of our brain. We have 3 segments of our brain, like kind of again, I'm not going to give you specifics at this point, but we've got the lower brain, the ancient brain, then we've got the limbic brain, which is like the middle brain, then we've got the newer brain, the cortex. The 2 lower brains are closed operating systems. When I look at Windows XP or Windows 2000, there is no support to that anymore. It's closed. It's not going to happen. And your 2 lower brains are like that. They're closed. But they carry information in them. And a lot of times if somebody goes through a traumatic event or as a kid doesn't have the information to put it together, there's a feeling there. There's a stimulus response and emotion to something that happened to a first person's face. It could be to a noise. It could be to a certain location. There's all kinds of different ways of thinking about it. But they don't know why they're feeling like that. And you say, why are you feeling like that? Well, it goes back to the correct answer. Really, probably I'd say correct if there is a correct answer. The best answer, the most useful answer is, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And then you just kind of sit with it and wait, and hopefully other pieces of information come up. In the therapeutic context, if you're thinking about doing hypnosis or NLP and you've got issues, if you make up the reasoning that it is because your wife is doing something or your husband is doing something or because your child did something, that's why you're feeling like that. But really it's just something that got stimulated from when you were a kid that never comes into full realization of what is explicit. What is explicit? Now, if you step on a toy that your kid left out on the floor, then you go, okay, it's that feeling right there upset me. And, we've told the children to put the toys away, but they leave them out sometimes and we step on them, as opposed to who knows what triggered that feeling to come up. So if I'm working with you, I'm going to listen for the congruence of it, and I'm going to test that map. And I'm going to keep testing that map, and then we're going to go to a deeper place, and all of a sudden things start coming out. Wait a minute, now what else is going on? Well, it's kind of a memory from when I was 14, and then I worked with a gentleman the other night, and we went back, I don't know to how many ages, and he goes, okay, I'm here, but I still got this pulling feeling, like somebody's pulling on my collar. And we went back, and it goes back to the age of 2, and he's like, man, I'd never realized I didn't have this. So he had made all these connections and built maps upon maps based on erroneous, false, not accurate information. And it's never going to be 100% accurate because we're moving, we're changing. It's not something that's still. It's never going to be 100% accurate. We can narrow it down and get close and get close enough to make a shift or a change or bring in new information to make it useful, so that as we filled in the story. And here's the thing. A lot of people go, no, I have to remember the story the way it is. Years ago, I got into I was telling a friend of mine about this, a really close friend, and we were up in Pennsylvania doing a sportsman show. We had 3 booths up there or something and covering that, and it was night after the show, and and he's like, I don't know about all this stuff you're talking about, if it's crazy. And I said, basically what we remember from when we were a kid, it changes. Carl Pribram, scientist, said, memory is a active synthetic process, which means it's active, it continues, and it's synthetic, which means it's not accurate. It can be fairly accurate. You can remember your mom yelling at you about certain things, but really it's not what actually happened. That the memory keeps updating every time you remember it, every time something new happens. The state of mind that you're in at the time that you remember it adds to the memory. So by the time something that happened when you were 9 years old and you're 45, there's been a lot of added information to it. Not that the basic memory of it isn't sort of accurate. Well, we went back, I remember my mother doing this to me, and I remember clearly, and da-da-da. And I says, yeah. And I said, and he got really upset. I mean, he was defending that memory. And I said, look, you've known me for I don't know how many years. You're one of my best friends in the world. I'm not lying to you. And he was like, this is BS. This is not accurate. You cannot tell me that I said, I'm not telling you that it didn't happen to you. But if you'll give me just a few minutes, let me show you something. Let me add a little bit of different perspective and information to that. And so he calmed down a little bit, had him lay down. We were sharing a room, so there was a bed next to me, had him lay down on the bed. And I was laying down myself. It was really probably too late to be doing that. I was tired and in bed, but it was like, okay, I've got to keep going and continue on with this. I'm not going to leave him in this state, especially before bedtime. So I took him through a process. And at a certain point, I moved around some perspectives for him.
And all of a sudden he just went, oh my gosh. He goes, oh, I get what you're saying now. I see it. He goes, she was just trying to be my mother, and she was younger than I am now, and she was doing the best she could for how old she, oh my gosh. And so it wasn't that the event didn't happen, but the event happened from his perspective with his filters locked in there in his map. But it wasn't necessarily the territory. When I was coming back the other day, about 2 weeks ago, if we had some real heavy rains up here, and at the end of the heavy rains, sun started coming out, but there were some incredible rainbows. Just some incredible rainbows. As I'm driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour. But the rainbow looks like it's staying in the same place. But it can't be staying in the same place because I'm moving at 70 miles an hour. But it keeps moving with me. And then as I start getting further down the road, all of a sudden the perspective starts changing because the road's curving and angling. Now the rainbow looks at a different place, but the person back where I initially started the process that's seeing the rainbow what does that person, he or she, see there? So the rainbow kind of is all over the place, but yet with different backgrounds. Sometimes I see Mount Shasta in the background, sometimes I don't, but there's the rainbow. So what was happening with him, my friend, was he started to move his map around a little bit. He looked at his map from another perspective, and it changed everything about the map. So now he's got new information of a 45-year-old, 50-year-old man. He's probably 45 at the time, 45-year-old man that adds to what was locked in as a map, what the map was drawn 40 years ago. Well, a lot of things have changed in that period of time, and so now he adds some new information to it, and it shifts and it changes. So it's very useful, and we look at a map and we think that's what it is. And for pretty well, if I'm going down I-5, it's pretty well I-5. But every day, one day, if you're going over the pass, you may not be able to get over it without change, and they may stop you and make you turn back and go around, because I've seen it happen where there's freaking like 20 miles of cars and trucks pulled over because it's so icy trying to come up to Mount Shasta from Redding or to go over the pass to Ashland that it's just not going to happen. So there's a map of the road, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what's going on. There's a lot of other variables that are happening that if you start to take them into consideration, it changes your map. And what NLP is about, what I'm about doing, is to say, okay, what's happening? What's your problem state and what's your outcome state? What's the problem? What's the present state that's bothering you? And I get as much information as I can from you about the present state, what's bothering you. And then I look at the outcome state. Where do you want to be instead? Where do you want to be? And a lot of times your issues and your problems are you have an expectation of where you want to be, but yet you're stuck at a certain place. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was, again, I'm a map guy, so I would study these Rand McNally maps, and I have been up and down and all over this United States. I think I've been to like 46, 47, maybe 48 states. No, I haven't been to Alaska. So I think it's like 47 states. And literally covered a lot of these states like Colorado and California and New York, where Florida, just any opportunity I got to take a different route to go see what that looked like, I wanted to do, because I realized that my map, what I was looking at, was not the same. But I'd say, okay, what's this look like? I had a curiosity of what are my senses going to pick up? What's that map going to be compared to the map that I'm looking at? So I'd find these little fine roads, and I'd look at the key to the map. You see the blue roads on Rand McNally are the interstate highways, and then the green roads are the thicker 2 to 4 lane highways, more main highways, but still not the interstates. And then you get into the red roads and the black roads, and then the roads that have the little dashes in it, which pretty well is going to be like a dirt road. And I was up in Oregon, exploring Oregon, and I had come in from New York, and I think I went north up through Montana, and then western northeastern Oregon, and then started coming down through, and there was different parts of the mountains. There's an area called, I believe it's Three Sisters Mountains, and I said, let me go see what that looks like. And on my map, it didn't seem like it was like going to be a nice journey, but when I got there, it was spectacular. I mean, that's part of the deal, is that playing with these maps and say, let me try this map and see what happens. And then it doesn't look any different than the color of the roads or the maps of upstate New York or Florida or West Texas. But there's little shaded green areas that say this is going to be having some trees there, and then there's some elevation markers. So every so often that say, hey, there's a mountain that's 10,000 foot here. So that looks interesting. Let me go try it out. And so I saw this really fine road, and it was probably June, July, when I was going through there. And I look at this road, and I see this mountain pass, and I decide, what the heck, I'm going to try going this mountain pass. So we've got a four-wheeler coming by. I don't know how loud it's going to be or how close it's going to be. I may have to turn it off for a minute. Oh, looks like he's shooting up another road, but he may be coming around this way. Yep. So anyways, I go down this road, and it's like, I think I went about 20 miles, and it just is getting more and more spectacular. Just beautiful, gorgeous. And but I'm noticing the road is getting thinner and less improved as I go along. And I keep going down the road, and again I get into the spectacular beauty of the mountains of this Three Sister area of Oregon. But the road keeps getting more and more closed, and then I see a campground, and I keep going forward, and then I see all these people that were at the campground, which would be a great place to spend the night. And my memory goes back to another map, an earlier map when I was living in Colorado back in the late 80s, lived in the Denver area, and I explored that. So every time I got any time off or had some time, I'd go somewhere in that state, and I covered, I don't think there's roads I haven't covered, but there's probably not a general area that I haven't covered to the state of Colorado. And this was up in the mountains just west of Denver. It was kind of, I think, on the other side of like Mount Evans. Anyways, I saw a similar type of road. And it was springtime, I would say, when this happened. And went up there and kept getting higher and higher and higher. And this road ended up going up about 13,000 feet. And the car that I had at the time had a real hard time making it up there. But as I kept going up, the road then turned into dirt road, and then from dirt road it went to snow. So I was but it had been plowed in the walls. When I finally got to the top, they were like 10 feet high, but it was able to take me through the pass and then get me down on the other side. And it was towards nighttime, so I got a spectacular sunset, and it was just a really enjoyable route. But there was nobody out there. If my car had been broken down or something happened, I don't know how long it would have taken for somebody to come and get me. So that's a map that I have of this same road I'm starting to go over in June or July, warmer weather and everything. And as all these people are looking at me, inquisitively, as I start to go up there, all of a sudden I get to the point where I hit a drift of snow. So as I look closer at the map, I can see that, closed in wintertime. Well, it's not winter, it's summertime. But they had so much snow, and nobody was plowing it in that part of the country. It wasn't like Colorado. It was different. But I had applied a different map. But here I am, 20 miles off track. I went down a side road at 20 miles, and now I've got to go 20 miles back in that direction. And what a lot of us do is we get stuck at that point, and we want to keep going forward. Maybe we'll wait till the ice melts, if it ever does melt. It might be next year, and then you get snowed in. And I'm using this as a metaphor of maps of what happens is you determine, and this happens thousands and thousands of times, of partial maps. And then you get stuck and you stay there and you don't know what to do. So you go to another map, but you're still kind of stuck. You haven't finished that. With the work of the map is not the territory, the menu is not the meal. What it allows us to do is to find out where you're stuck and create a new map for you. You got a mountain and the road is covered with snow, And glaciers, you're not going any further. My mind is sitting there saying, there's got to be a way, there's got to be a way. And guy comes up to me and he says, you're not getting through there. It probably won't open this year. And I'm like, well, why does it say closed in winter? And he says, well, it's closed in winter, but we got a ton of snow and they don't have the money to spend to plow it. So a whole different thing that's happening. But there was a part of me that I recognized and I remember that was real stubborn about it. It was like, no, I'm going to make it through that part that wants to keep going forward and break through it. And yet the map that I had set up for that in my mind, that I was going to make it, and my plans to get onto the other side of that and then where I was going to go was now off track, and probably was going to, hours off track, because as the road got smaller and smaller and got to dirt road, I had to slow down. So it took more time than if I was going 60 or 70 miles an hour. At that point, I was probably doing 10 or 15 miles an hour. So now I've got to turn around and go back in that direction. But my brain doesn't want that to happen because it has plans. It has a map. I already dedicated myself. The correlation is goals. We have goals. We have expectations of what we're going to do. And we meet impassable walls a lot of times. The reality of is that was not a plowed road, and I wasn't going to take skis or snowmobile. No, somebody wasn't going to pull me with a snowmobile across that pass. There were still many miles to go up, and height and everything, the snow was going to be deeper. It was going to be worse, but I wasn't. So I had to turn around. I had to come back, go all that way back, and then around. And people don't want to do that. I didn't want to do that. Inside I could feel myself complaining, and I said, wait a minute, I'm in I loved the ride there. It was spectacularly beautiful. The expectation of I should be further down the road and I should be here by nighttime, by the time I'm getting ready to get a hotel or motel or camp out to sleep, it's not going to happen that way. But what happens to a lot of people get stuck on the map. That map is there. They think it's permanent. That's what they have to do. It can't be changed. It can't be rerouted or anything like that. And through NLP, through hypnosis, through the map is not the territory. And that initially came from my memory back in 1933. Albert Korbzinski wrote a book called Science and Sanity. I guess it's a 900-page monster. A real tome, tough to get through. Several people that I know in NLP have read it several times. They said it made a huge difference. But one of the main things out of that and what he was teaching about language between science and sanity, and the language, the science of the language, is the maps that we create in our mind we think are the actual territory itself, and they're not. So I come back around and I have to shift and change what my expectations are now and be realistic. But we have stubborn parts of us, hundreds if not thousands sometimes, that are partial things like that, where we wanted something from our parents and we never got it. We were stopped, and now they're gone, they're past, or we've moved away, or they're old and they don't remember, whatever it is, and it's not going to happen. We are not going to get through our expected territory of map in our mind. It's not going to happen. So what do? Do we live with that? If you look at people when they get older, people that are younger, people when they're younger, they have a lot of hope. They have a lot of ambition. They aren't a lot of times deterred. Thank goodness. A kid growing up learning to walk falls down and doesn't. An adult might fall down one time trying to ski and say, "That's it. I'm not going to try to ski. This is embarrassing." And why can't I be an expert skier right off the bat? We're kid learning to write, my little daughter learning to write and spell and do mathematics and everything. Sometimes she'll get real frustrated about the fact that she can't continue on the map that she expects to get to a certain level on a video game, or to be at a certain level of writing and spelling. And the frustration is, but the thing is, do they recover? And thank God that the kids have something in them that makes them resilient. And a lot of times our maps are not resilient. And we have a lot of maps that have been sitting there from, again, past frustrations, past incompletions, past expectations that just are not fulfilled. We're not being realistic about the territory. And what I love about NLP with myself and working with other people is the ability to go back look at this stuff and recreate the map from that time period. The wonderful thing about the imagination is it's timeless. You can go back to that time. If you can get past the stubbornness of believing, well, that's what happened and that's the way it was, like my buddy, and there's nothing. We go back. Not only does he get a different angle, he sees things differently and everything. I make some suggestions. What if you put this little road in here and thought about it like this? What if you took that perspective? And then it's all of a sudden it's like these bad feelings he's had about his mom for years disappear. He's got empathy, he's got compassion, he's got love again. Something is flowing. So now there's a different map, a map of energy flowing through you, a map of emotions, a map of feelings about things that now allow him to have a different relationship with his mother. But he's holding that map inside himself, and he determined the meaning of the map inside himself that way. He's the one that's feeling it, though. I remember at a seminar years ago with John Overdurf, Julie Silverthorne. It was a seminar, and there was quite a bit of people in there, and we were talking about Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky thing, and I had one opinion, and half the class was with me, and half the class had another opinion. And I had all my reasonings, about what I thought about this and what it would do to the integrity of the country, and, the kids would start picking up and doing this stuff and things like that. And she looked at me and she goes, I understand. She goes, I happen to be on the other side of the equation, but I totally understand where you're at. She goes, let me ask you a question mark. Question mark. That's funny. A question mark. She said, does Bill Clinton know you're feeling this way right now? I said, no, of course not. He has no idea. And she goes, well, whose circuits are you burning up right now? And I was like, oh, she got me. I said, you got me, Julie. I said, mine. My circuits. Yeah. Nobody else's. Not the people around me or anything. They all had different maps. But my map was not doing well for my body. My map was not doing well for my relationships. That was not something that was useful to me. And the guy that I was mad at had no idea. Now apply that to your own life and think about that in your own life in so many different ways. What are you doing? What are your thoughts? They may be right. You may have 12 jurors that can prove to you that, yep, this is close enough to what happened that we would find that person guilty. But you're holding that in your body, that map. And that map is running your circuitry. It's running your blood pressure. It's running your nervous system. And when you're younger, you can do that stuff. There's a lot of resilience to your system. And as you get older, it's not so much resilience. Yeah, that's a map and a belief too. People could say, well, I'm different than that. I'm going to live forever, 150. Okay, that's fine. I'm not going to say anything. If you can and you learn to do it and we can figure out your map and how much better it is than my map, I'm going to take your map. I don't have an issue with just dropping my map and picking up yours if you can make it to 150. But the person probably isn't burning their circuits up like I wasn't getting upset and anger and raising my blood pressure. And those maps stay in there constantly in your system, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, physically. They can wear on your body, or they can add and benefit to your body. The same thing with food, what kind of food you eat. Anyways, so it's funny, I haven't even gotten into really what I wanted to talk about, but I think you're getting an idea of a sense of the map is not the territory. When you look at the hamburger in the picture, when you see the McDonald's advertisement for the hamburger, and for all you vegans, when you see whatever your favorite food is and the vegetables, how beautiful they look in magazines, that's a map. That's a menu. It's not the actual thing you're going to participate. Now, the great thing here is if you realize that one of the things about McDonald's and really good restaurants is that a lot of times it will be as good or surpass the map that's in your mind. The reason McDonald's and companies like McDonald's are so successful, especially McDonald's, they're systematized and they're consistent. So when I have a map of if I want to go and have a cup of coffee, I know that if I go to Starbucks, it affects me differently. If I go to different coffee places, some coffee puts me to sleep. It's my system. I'll drink a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden my eyes will start, and I can sleep for an hour or two. But what I realized about McDonald's coffee was when I drank it, it didn't zap me out where I was shaking and my heart was beating fast, and I'm like going, oh man, what do I do to settle down? McDonald's was consistent every time that I went. So my map is that if I want to feel a certain way by drinking a McDonald's coffee to give me some energy when I'm feeling tired driving down a long distance in the road, I can go to McDonald's and I can pretty well expect that coffee is going to be the same. That fish sandwich in New York is going to be fairly consistent. Their maps are very consistent. They're not identical. Nothing is identical. Of course, if you go to the molecular level, it's all going to be different. But it's close enough that I can have that expectation of it. And restaurants that if you go in and you have a hamburger one time and it's gorgeous and it's beautiful and you eat it, or you have a salad that is just crisp and it's got all the different greens and your favorite dressing, and you go in the next time and there's a different cook there and your map is disappointed. Or you go in one time, it happened to me recently where I went one time we went to this Thai place down in Reading several months ago, and the price was inexpensive and it got really good ratings. Well, we went in there and we ate and we're like, the Thai place in Mount Shasta is actually better. And I wasn't as pressed as I thought I would be with all the ratings and what people said. Well, we were down there because Claire had a field trip last week, and we went down and we decided to go back and eat there. And it was spectacular. We understood now. So the map changed. The map changed again. We didn't, diss it forever. It was good enough to go back, and price-wise, they have some good Thai food. We went back, and what everybody had was spectacular. I asked the waitress, I said, let me ask you. I said, we were here several months ago, and we were not that keen on it. I said, but she said, no, it was the same person cooking. So what was the map of the person cooking 2 months ago, the same person as compared to the map now? Was something happen that day? Did they not get something in that they were expecting? Were they short? Did she have an argument? It was a lady. Did she have an argument with her husband or with her son or with her daughter, whoever, employee? We don't know. Did somebody not show up for work? And that then her map now changes the food that we eat. So maps are changing. We look for consistency. We start to expect consistency. Certain people want to control things, and then other times you got to realize we're in a changing world, and some things you can't control. I was just listening to Jeff Goins, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He was doing an interview, and he was talking about a guy that he knows that, his son was playing Little League Baseball, and he was about 5 years old, and he noticed like his son was acting weird on the field, and he wasn't doing things or swinging like he normally did. So they took him into the doctor, and they did an MRI on the child, and they found a brain tumor in the child. And so they had to have an operation. The child had an operation, the boy. And unfortunately, because of the area of the brain that they were taking the tumor out of, he ended up blind and deaf. And Jeff was talking to this guy because he was a friend of his, somebody that he knew. And he said the guy didn't seem too bothered about it. And he was talking, and yet he was still interacting with his child and everything. And he says, I got to ask you. He goes, this is just tragic. I'm sorry what happened with your son. And how are you doing this? How are you keeping the energy and the passion that you have in life and not letting this affect you? And he says, well, he goes, it's my expectations. And I'm paraphrasing here from what he said. This is what I got out of it. He said, it's my expectations. If I expect my son every day to have sight and hearing and expect him to be able to do things based on sight and hearing, he says, I'm going to be disappointed every day, and my son's going to know that, and I'm going to know that. But I realize the situation with his hearing and his eyesight right now, that's the realism of it. And I have to base my expectations on that realism. Not that I can't hope and wish for that he does get better, and that maybe so through neuroplasticity and doing some things he could begin to see again or get partial sight back, or some implants that help him see and hear and get back to that. But right now, this is where he's at, and I got to continue to love him and do the best I can do. And that's really the deal of the map and the territory for me. That's what it's all about, is to say, where are you stuck? Where do you have expectations? Where do you see things? Where is your map not useful to you? Not useful to me. I mean, when I look at a Rand McNally map, and I love it. I mean, it's funny, John Overdurf, one of my teachers, he thinks about me when I talk about maps, and he smiles, and he laughed on the last phone call we were on because I started talking about the Rand McNally maps, and he goes, "You and your maps?" And I said, "Yeah, well, you've been to every corner of every state of just about the United States and been to, I don't know, 12 or 15 countries around the world. Maps, are very useful and they're important, but I love them." And what I do a lot of times, I would make up what the area was going to look like, but I didn't put my expectations that they had to look like that or I was going to be disappointed. And sometimes I've gone to places, like I remember the first time I went to Bodega Bay and I passed through and it was kind of like nighttime and it looked really cool going through it. And we recently had a doctor's appointment down by there, the San Francisco Bay Area. And we said, let's go back to Bodega Bay. And in the daytime, it was totally different. I had expectations that it was going to be a very wealthy because at nighttime going through, it had a certain beauty to it with the lights and the ocean and stuff. But as I went through the day, I said, no, this is an older town. It's not very wealthy, at least where we were going through. The restaurant that we looked up had a great rating, a fish place, so we went in there. But when we ate, so our maps had changed on it. But the sense of the expectations and the excitement about the possibilities of going back to Bodega Bay, and then say, well, what can we do? And it got overcast and it got cold. It was really cold. Where inland, 20 miles, it was 20, 25 degrees warmer. But we went out, we brought some blankets, we went out by the beach and let Claire go in the water and everything, and we made the best of it. We said, okay, here's what it is. What do we make the best of it? And there was a couple side roads where I was like, I'm going this way. And one of the keys was that I would find roads. One time in Colorado, I was in southwestern Colorado. And literally, I was like, okay, I'm on my way to California. And I worked another way through. This is when I was traveling cross country, not when I was actually living in Colorado. And I was out in the middle of nowhere on this road. And there was no cars around. I hadn't seen cars for a long period of time. It just come out of some, smaller mountain roads, beautiful, but now it was flat. I was in Southwest, and there was a park. It was Mesa Verde, I believe it was, a sign for turning in for a park. But again, there was no traffic, no car, and it was off the road a little way, so I'd have to drive if it was closed. I didn't know it was going to be closed. And I literally parked my car in the middle of I could go straight, left or right. Or I could go backwards. I wasn't going backwards. I was going straight left or right. And I parked the car there and just sat there and said, okay, let's see what happens. I'm going to sit with this without making a decision. Do I go right, left? Do I go straight? Because I was in a hurry to get to California. I was excited about getting there. And it kept coming up that I turn left and go to this park and just go get lost, see where that takes me. I'm like, okay. So I turned left and went. The park was open, and I was one of the few people there that day. It was a great day. It was in the lower 60s, clear blue sky, these little pine trees, and then going up to the park, and it was like it was there for myself, and it was a really magical, mystical experience. So I would get lost a lot, like that Colorado road that I was telling you about when I first, with the 10-foot ceiling or 10-foot high walls that whatever kind of snow plow would plow through. Must have been pretty good size one to be able to do that. That was a road that I didn't know. I said, I don't really know what it's going to be. I didn't have any visuals that were coming in. A lot of times I get visuals and they get me excited. I'm going to Florida, going to go see, this is what this town in Florida is going to look like. First time I went to Clearwater, I had a exciting idea of what Clearwater was going to look like as a map that got me there. So the maps can be very useful to get you there, to get you excited to go there. But if you expect it too much to look like what's in your mind, you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you're flexible enough to say, okay, I'm here and it's different, this is great, I get to re-explore the map and add things to it and subtract things away from it, then it becomes different. But that day in Mesa Verde, when I took a left and went up there, was fantastic. And so a lot of times I would get lost. And every once in a while, I'd get stopped and frustrated, like when I was in Oregon and hit a snowbank and say, okay, it's only 10 miles across the pass, and it would put me 70 miles up the road. I think I had calculated it was like 70 miles that I had to now go back around, whereas I would have just taken 10, I'd be at the same spot, but it would take 70 miles now to get around. Where you accept your situation, like that gentleman, they had the 5-year-old son, and you accept it, and you say, okay, the map is not the territory. The map has changed. My expectations of what the map is different. And like I was saying a little bit ago, a lot of times when we get older, you look at older people, they got gated communities, and they don't come out of their house much, and they have people doing their shopping for them, and they're not as active. Well, physically, we get older. A lot of times we can't do things, or people get sick and they can't do things. But a lot of times it's because they said, no, this is the way I expect it. This is the map. This is how I like it, and I don't want to change. But the map becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. And like that, a place in Oregon, they camp at their campgrounds, and they're okay to stay there for the rest of their lives. And a lot of people are not okay with that. They want to keep moving. And they're willing to take a shot and say, I want to look at this different. I'm willing to try something else. And there's been plenty of tests and research studies about people that do live into their hundreds and that are happy when they're older. And it's because they continue to refresh their map. They continue to update the software. And they're okay with learning new things. So the map is not the territory is real important. Now, here's something I want to... where this thing went compared to where the map of what I had planned to give you went off track. However, there is some information that I want to give you because I found it fascinating as far as maps and territories go. Let's look at the road. When I say road, you're going to go down the road, or you're going to go down the highway, or you're going to go down a back road or a dirt road. There's many different kinds of roads. And years ago, when I was living in New York, a friend of mine worked for the Department of Transportation in New York, and I was going with him somewhere, and he goes, I got to stop into work for a little while if you don't mind going, and then we can go. I think we were going over to Syracuse to visit somebody here, and it was about 30-something mile drive, but he stopped into his workplace. And he goes, you want to just wait here? And I said, no, I want to go in and see where you work. He goes, it's just boring. He says, you're not going to find much in here. Well, I go into the place, right? And it's this warehouse type place. And as I go in there, I start seeing all these circular samples. There was probably 6 inches in diameter and maybe anywhere from 4 inches to a foot deep of pavement. Again, he worked for the Department of Transportation, and what he did was he would go around. His job was working for the state of New York to make sure that the construction crews that were putting in roads were putting in the right type of roads with the right materials and everything else like that. And I'm in there, and there's hundreds of these samples all over the place, different samples, cement, in different levels of cement. And then they had these tubs full of water where there was like poles and things, or steel sticking out of them, and in the water was cement. And what these were samples. And, when people go in and they drill for oil, they drill down, or they drill for gold, they're looking for samples. I watched this program about Oak Island, which is really neat, about a treasure in Oak Island, Canada, and they keep drilling down and try to find samples of what's down there to discover these hidden chambers where the gold is. And so what my friend did at the Department of Transportation was they would take samples of the road. So they had all these samples there underwater and everything. And I'm like, this is crazy. And I started asking him questions. He goes, are you really interested in this? I said, I'm extremely interested in this. I'm a map person. And I said, I'm driving on roads. And I said, some roads that I go on drive me nuts. They make a lot of noise. Other roads are quiet. I remember as a kid walking down roads where we used to walk barefoot on the roads in the summertime because they would have little tar bubbles on them, and we'd pop them with our toes as we'd been walking down there, and we'd be a mess by the time we got home. But it was fun because these little tar bubbles would bubble up, and we'd just get our toe, and the feeling of squishing them down with our toe and popping them was, I guess, like people use with the bubble wrap today, where you pop the bubble wrap, and it was similar to that. Anyways, I started asking a question. I said, what are all these, why all these samples? And he says, there are different rules to the road, to what's used in the road. And I'm like, tell me more. So not only is the map not the territory, but the road is not really the road. Each road is different. And he started talking to me about the science of the roads, the difference between asphalt and different types of asphalt, the time of the year, the time of the day, how much curing was it going to have? Was it early in the morning or late in the afternoon? They would change the formulas of the asphalt based on heat, humidity, the weight of the vehicles traveling down the road, the speed that was allowed, corners versus straight roads. So I wrote to him a little bit about it, and he goes, what do you want to know about this for? I said, well, I'm talking about map versus territory. And the correlation that I'm drawing from this is that your map, the map that you have, and the maps that you have, if you go deeper into them, you start to find out more. They keep reducing. You'll find out, to me, interesting information. One of the most interesting things he said to me, says cement never dries. It continues to get harder. And I'm like, what about 100 years? He goes, yep. He goes, that's why we got to go and rebuild a lot of bridges. He goes, if you'll look at them, he goes, they get really brittle and they start to fall apart. He said, they're continuing to dry. And then he had I said, well, what's the deal with the underwater? He says, underwater, cement never dries. It never dries. It cures. He said it's more like a chemical reaction that keeps working to make it better with time, like a fine wine, like wine that, but it never really dries. It only cures. But the idea of the cement. And so, one of the things John Overdurf, Julie Silverthorne, NLP says is, you are always change. You're always changing. It's never the same. There's always change going on. And as I've talked about all these different maps and how they interact with each other, you probably starting to get the idea that things don't change. And when he told me about cement, it just continues to harden. And it'll just continue to get more and more brittle till it breaks apart. But it's hardening that whole time. I thought it was pretty amazing. And then he talked about different things about, you have to they use these different rollers on the road. And that some of them will shake and some of them won't shake, because there has to be they use these different types of rock. In New York, they'll use certain types of carbonated rock, but also they have to use a limestone or limestone and granite mix. They'll put granite there so the road doesn't get polished because of possible lawsuits. And he says that's a whole nother angle we got to go into with the curves of the road, because if a lawyer can go and take a sample of the road and it wasn't done properly, then the state can be sued for millions of dollars. I said, you're kidding me. I said, he goes, no. He goes, every road is different, and we have to apply different standards, and they're constantly mixing different cement, different amount of water to cement, different types of cement, adding different types of chemicals or stones in there with the asphalt. And then they go back and they'll find out what they have, these gauges, these like nuclear type gauges that they go and say, what is they want to compress the asphalt to make sure there's a certain amount of air spaces that the water and the salt doesn't get down into the rebar, these steel pieces that they use with the asphalt to keep them in place, because they start to rust and oxidize. Then it'll create holes and space and potholes. And so we go through this whole thing of what the tolerances are, and they use gamma radiation to check the spots, and what the density is of the oil that's in there. And so the map, this guy gave me like kind of a mini PhD of different things that happen. They're using hydrochloric acid, but the idea that cement didn't dry, the corners, that they use a bigger percentage of hard rocks like granites that aren't going to polish, that are going to stay rough, so your tires grab as you go around corners. So they change that, and different heights of the road. Again, humidity, time of the day, time of the year. Why you don't see them repairing roads a lot in the wintertime, because of the cure rate of the asphalt and the cement, and how that holds bridges up and things like that. So there was a lot more to that. I just thought I'd bring that in there to say that, as you go deeper, a lot of times just finding out the information changes things. If we go down into deeper levels of saying, okay, knowing that road now, that New York State or California or whatever state you live in has put that much thought into the curve, the angle of the curve of the road, the bridge that you're going over, the tolerance is supposed to hold up 11 to 22 times. In Germany, when I was in Germany, they'd have their roads were much better over there. And I never understood, why are their roads so much better? And a lot of times the Germans will go down up to 40 feet, and then they'll have different grades of stone, levels of stone, porous to let the water go through if it does go through, so that the road on top will stay 40 years, where the expectation in New York was up to 20 years. But in Germany, they had an expectation of 40 years, so their map had to be different about how deep they go in building the roads, which then you have to go and understand the technology better. So what maps do you want to build? What maps do you want to build that are going to get you there? What NLP does, what hypnosis does, what I do, what people like John Overdurf and the people that have really put their life study and research and process of doing coaching with people and trainings is to say, what kind of road? Do you need a dirt road, or do you need a 40-foot German type road to where you're going? What are you using right now? How do we improve that? What's the minimal amount we have to do to get this working? What routes do you want to take? The maps are full of all kinds of stuff, but they're also full of all kinds of holes. They're full of places that you can improve, shortcuts that you can take, and maybe just different attitudes about how you have to go backtrack a little bit and then go back around, and then what you can do in the meantime that's useful to you if you have to backtrack, like I did in Oregon, where I could have gone 10 miles, but I had to add another 60 to get where I was going because that road was closed. How do I enjoy that process? What does the father of that 5-year-old do to keep him in a state of mind that he's able to continue to love his child and not get depressed? This is in the last few days. I can't remember what it was. Somebody was telling me, or a movie I was watching about their child. They had gotten a vaccine, and that night the child had a fever and allergic reaction to it, and the child started screaming. They said it was an unbelievable scream, and they took him to the hospital, and past that point the child developed autism, and they were showing pictures of the child like the day before, and then the next day what happened, what the child was like now, and he had grown up. It was so many years ago. He had to wear a helmet on his head so he wouldn't bang it into but you could see movies and pictures of what he was like before the shot and then the allergic reaction, and they didn't fare so well. The husband, ended up getting drunk. I don't know if it was this one or I'm mixing two maps together right now, but one of them ended up committing suicide. Another one went into deep depression and divorced the wife and left and just kind of living like a hobo. Their map, what is different between the 5-year-old's father that had the brain tumor, the child is now blind and deaf, compared to the child that the parents that had autism from a certain reaction? What are the maps that they're running? And if you're running maps that are going to bring you into a direction that's not useful or good for you or your family, I want to model the guy that does with the 5-year-old. I want to model that guy and find out what is he doing in there, and how can I use, if it's not that elements, because that situation hasn't happened to me, but I guarantee if I watch his map of how he processes the information that comes in from his senses, and then the thoughts and the meanings that he has, and what people say to him. I mean, this guy was talking about being inundated with people just saying, this is crazy. You should be feeling this way. You should be feeling that way. They're putting their maps on his map. But I want to go and I want to find out what is different about this guy that he's able to do that. And how can I use that strategy or parts of that strategy that he's using in my life, where things have happened to me that where I held on to expectations that didn't pan out. And maybe I'm still holding them somewhere, and start to become aware, oh my gosh, I still have that map activated and it's causing me to feel a certain way that's not useful to my body, and discover that, and then be able to shift it and change the map And NLP is all about that. And that's why it's so important to really realize the map is not the territory. So what I'm going to do is there's a version that I had done to this. I'll probably put it out in 2 parts because I went longer than I expected to go. Again, my expectations, but I'm okay with it. I'm sitting here. The sun is now gone behind the mountain that I'm looking at. It dropped about 15 degrees in about 5 minutes. And so I'm going to start rolling up the window and start heading back. I also did The Meal is Not the Menu. As I'm updating this, I'm bringing you to the present, but I'm also going to go, and I've got another version of this that I did several years back that I think you'll find useful also. So I'll just put out 2 of these, part 1 and part 2, of The Map is Not the Territory, The Meal is Not the Menu. And I'd love your feedback. I think by listening to this, my intent was not only to give you some information, to stay with it long enough that your unconscious mind and your conscious mind start to get the usefulness of this technology of what hypnosis and NLP is, how different it is than that swing and watch or voodoo or whatever else like this. We're finding the great thing, and why I continue to stay with this, is the more that brain research they're doing now, and you see neuroscience all over the place, they're proving that, and they're finding out that what we've been doing, when I say we, I mean the people in the NLP community, it's more specifically John Overdurf and the people around him, who has been studying brain research for years and years and has kept NLP, the model of success, the model of how to do things successfully, has kept it in line with brain research. And we haven't had to move too much offline because the brain research is really coming out and proving that we've been on the right track for a long time. We know the how. They can see what's happening in the brain, and they can see that things are shifting and changing, but they're still in the discovery of the how. How do we make this happen? Well, with NLP and hypnosis, we've known this for years and years. We just haven't had the proof that they have now with the neuroscience of the how, or of what was going on inside the brain. We knew it worked. We had a map. We knew this map worked, and neuroscience didn't have that same map, and so they doubted, but now they're finding out, and they're finding out a lot of times with meditation and meditators, which are advanced versions, specific side roads of NLP and hypnosis, of how meditation does the same thing, and a lot of people are being healed and helped with that. So anyways, what I'll do is, if you've got questions, ideas, thoughts about how this has helped you or how it could help you more, or questions you might have, let me know. And then part 2 of this will be the one that I did several years ago. And to be honest with you, I have no idea where I was on the map back then. I don't know what it is. I'll go through and edit it to make sure there's not anything in there that's really dated, clean it up for you, and then put it out as part 2. So this is Mark J. Ryan. I hope you're really enjoying this introductory. We've got a lot more ahead for you of hypnosis and NLP. And if enough people ask me, I might even get into brainwashing. And by the way, thank you for all the people. I have to go and change that. It'll probably be changed if you haven't noticed it already. If you started listening recently, it should be changed, where I asked for a volume 9 that I was missing from an old podcast. And a whole bunch of you send volume 9. So it was really neat to see that, I still had like 2,000 subscribers, and that a bunch of people wrote and were glad to hear that I was back online talking again, anxious to hear what I had to put out. And so many of you thankfully sent me that volume 9. And so I'll be able to use that and work with that. So get ready for part 2. And then after that, we'll probably, I would say, go into stimulus response and maybe some sensory acuity. But I think stimulus response at this point would be appropriate after the map and the territory, because when you got that understanding, now we start to see how they link up together and how all the different senses link up into what we call synesthesias in NLP, a little different than synesthesias and what might be in the psychiatric or psychological manuals. But it basically is how those congregate together into like a constellation or a pack. A pack could be, several stimulus and synesthesia together. And then you get into a constellation where you've got, if you got a stimulus response, if you got a bunch of different stimulus response that trigger all at one time, then we might have a constellation of them. And we go in there and we can shift those around too. But they're based on the maps. and how important they are. So this is Mark J. Ryan. Thanks for listening, and get part 2 and then get ready to go into the stimulus response. Love to hear some feedback from you, and please spread the word. Tell your friends, tell other people that might be interested or benefit from this. Thanks. Have a great day, night, whatever time it is, wherever your map is, whatever your map is going through. Mine right now is sunset, getting cold, ready to go home, warm up, and getting some chow. Take care. Thanks. Enjoy. Bye-bye.
This podcast is brought to you by The Secret Meditation. Learn to get in touch with the magical frequency, the frequency that will change your life. Now, find The Secret Meditation at www.thesecretmeditation.com.